major blow for the Chavismo dream. Venezuela's opposition wins big in parliamentary elections, ending the socialists' grip on the country. Also on today's program, after half a century of conflict, Colombia could be on the verge of peace. But should the government strike a deal with FARC? And in Picture This, Santa is on his way. After several failed attempts, much-needed supplies are finally on their way to the International Space Station. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. A major shake-up of Venezuelan politics. The country's centre-right opposition won a landslide victory in parliamentary elections in what is the first significant shift in power since Hugo Chavez took office in 1999. His vision of 21st century socialism has steered the country politically and economically for the past 17 years. But on Sunday night, Venezuela's opposition coalition broke the socialists' hold of the legislature. The country has been plagued by economic slowdown, falling oil prices, and rampant corruption. A recent poll shows that 85% of Venezuelans were dissatisfied with the direction that the country was taking. Today's Newsmaker is Venezuela's Chavismo, as we ask if this latest result is further proof of South America's lurch from the left to the right. Sandra Gathmann sent this report from Caracas.
This was a moment 17 years in the making. Supporters of Venezuela's political opposition celebrating a landslide win in parliament for the first time. The promise of change finally in their grasp. Despite a swing in support for the opposition, Nicolás Maduro remains president. In the lead-up to elections, he encouraged supporters to take to the streets if the opposition won. But the president accepted Sunday's defeat.
Con nuestra moral, con nuestra ética, a reconocer.
I recognize these adverse results and accept them, and tell our Venezuela that the Constitution and democracy have won.
Decirle a nuestra Venezuela.
Sunday's parliamentary elections may spell a new dawn for politics in the country. Venezuela has struggled to shake the ever-present memory of late President Hugo Chavez, whose socialist revolution won the loyalty of much of the country's poor through social programs. But his successor, Nicolás Maduro, has seen his popularity slide as former Chavez loyalists become disillusioned with Venezuela's collapsing economy and climbing crime rate. Sunday's election saw a high turnout, with millions of Venezuelans flocking to polling booths guarded by soldiers to elect new members into the 167-seat parliament. Many were inspired by a sense of duty.
Para mí es sumamente importante el estar aquí y el llegar a esa hora.
For me, it's very important to be here today, for my country, for Venezuela, for my children, for all those people who want to go forward.
Today we're gambling the pension of our elderly. We're gambling everything the government is giving us for the people. The right wing has never given the people anything.
The streets of central Caracas were unusually quiet on Sunday, except for armed soldiers. With tensions high on both sides of the political divide, accusations of intimidation flew. In the slums, where half of the city's residents live, we saw a gang of young men on motorcycles beep their horns and carry the flag of the ruling party. While in the suburb of Jardines del Valle, opposition supporters heckles the mayor of Caracas, a Maduro loyalist. But the opposition insists it won't be looking for a battle in Congress.
Es importante entender que nosotros vamos a una asamblea.
We're going to the National Assembly, not to take revenge. We're going to discuss. But there's discussion. Another thing is impunity. We have to respond to wrongdoing. But we aren't going to go to the National Assembly and do what they did.
Hacer lo mismo que hicieron ellos.
This is truly a historic win for the opposition in Venezuela. It's the first time in 17 years they've won a majority in parliament. Their chanting the national anthem of Venezuela. This is really a special time for the people in this room.
But after celebrations die down, the hard work begins to unite a deeply divided nation, an effort which will have to begin inside Congress. Sandra Gathmann, TRT World, Caracas.
Well, joining me now to discuss what's next for Venezuelan and South American politics in Caracas is Gregory Wilpert. He's the author of Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez Government. And in Austin, Texas is Reggie Thompson, a political and security analyst at the Stratfor Research Center. He's an expert on Venezuelan domestic and foreign policy. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Gregory Wilpert, let's start with you. The Venezuelans have been through some tough times recently. Horrible food shortages, inflation, the economy has taken a battering. People are celebrating in the streets now after the opposition has done well in the election. Is this a good day for Venezuela?
Well, it depends on which side you are on. For the Chavistas, obviously, this is the worst day. The thing is, certainly the economic shortages and the inflation have been battering everyone here, both Chavista and the other side. And now, of course, both sides would certainly be hoping that a major change in direction in the economic policy will be taken so that, the inflation and the shortages come to a stop. So that, in that sense, I think the possibility of that happening is certainly a good day for everyone. But the possibility of losing the political project that President Chavez started is certainly the worst of days for the Chavistas and obviously a good day for the opposition.
Gregory, where did they go wrong, the Chavistas?
Well, it's difficult to say, I think, because the project that President Chavez started back in 1999 had brought about a lot of positive changes for the country, particularly with reducing poverty. But one of the things that it also brought about was tremendous amount of resistance, which caused Chavez to back then introduce a currency control in order to stop capital flight. And that currency control, I think, is the root of the problems that Venezuela is suffering through now. That is, the currency control was kept for a very long time, creating a massive black market for dollars, which ended up distorting the economy tremendously. And so it kind of depends on which side you're on. But I would say that the root of the problem is really trying trying to introduce this political project in a context of tremendous amount of resistance that had caused these, that led to these economic problems. And President Maduro was not able to figure out how to basically get around this tremendous economic distortions that the policies of the Chavez government already had set up.
Reggie Thompson, Nicolas Maduro said, he had some very conciliatory quotes and sayings in the past 24 hours, but then he also said the economic war has triumphed. Do you think he truly believes that, or he's just appealing to his base there?
Well, at this point, it's very clear that for Nicolas Maduro, the key thing is to really keep some measure of support within the PSUV and to try to really handle the economic problems going forward. You have to remember that for Maduro, he's lost a lot of political capital after this election, really, because a significant portion of voters that formerly favored Chavez and the PSUV clearly switched sides and voted for the opposition here. You had some pretty significant opposition majorities coming out of some of the states that reported in yesterday, and even with 99 legislators, really the opposition coalition has quite a commanding majority that it can leverage to really get legislation passed through the National Assembly. Now, I do believe that Maduro, he does believe that the most important thing right now is to find out how to handle the economic problems that are really affecting Venezuela, because over the next year, you're going to see a deepening of these, really, with a lot of Venezuela's additional sources of funding drying up, and with inflation, just rampant inflation affecting everybody in the country, really, but especially the poorest who really came to rely on some of the government spending as a way out of poverty. This is going to be a crucial year, and 2016 will be a challenging year for both the PSUV and for Nicolas Maduro.
Gregory, in Caracas, what do you think the opposition in the new National Assembly will do, given that they are the majority now? Do you think that they'll try to get rid of President Maduro even before presidential elections come up?
I definitely think they will try to get rid of President Maduro. The big question is how. And there it really depends on the kind of majority that they have. If they achieve the 2/3 majority, the effort will be much simpler for the opposition, because then they can either start proceedings, an impeachment proceeding to remove him from office, or but that would have to be preceded also by proceedings to remove Supreme Court judges, which they could also do at that point. Or an alternative route would be to call for a new constitutional assembly and rewrite the constitution, basically a strategy that Chavez took back in 1999 and in 2000, and with which he succeeded. The third route is a recall referendum, but for that they actually don't need any kind of majority in the National Assembly. They just have to collect signatures. But considering that since collecting signatures is so difficult and time-consuming, I'm sure they'll go for either the first or the second route, which is the impeachment or the Constitutional Assembly.
Reggie, given how divisive Venezuela is for not only the country itself, but the region, and of course globally, there is a theory that the United States and Western powers have tried to strangle Venezuela economically. How true is that, if at all?
Yes, the truth is most of Venezuela's problems are structural in nature, as the capital controls have really choked off the flow of foreign currency inside the country. A lot of the distortions also within the economy, such as the low price of gasoline on the domestic market, have really created a domestic shortfall, revenue shortfall, both for the national government and for the state oil company Petróleos de Venezuela. So really, there's a lot of structural problems within the country itself, and this is not due to any type of foreign interference. It's just that the domestic economy is really under severe strain because of some of the policies enacted under the PSUV.
And Reggie, looking broader, we're seeing Cuba being mainstreamed. It's got a relationship of sorts with the United States. We saw Argentina choose a center-right leader. Elsewhere in the region, the FARC rebels, and we're going to talk about that later on, they're suing for peace in Colombia. Do you believe that the region is shifting from the left towards the center at least, or the right?
Yes, there is very much a definite trend that has already begun of a shift, if not really towards the center or to the right, but away from the type of populism we observed in the past decade. Because really, over the past 10 to 15 years in Latin America, the governments that came into power were really able to leverage the significant commodity inflows, the inflows from commodity exports, such as mineral exports, oil exports, in the case of Argentina and Brazil, soybean exports, for significantly increased public spending. Now, that did coincide with a leftward shift because of the cohort of leaders coming into power, such as Lula in Brazil, Nestor Kirchner in Argentina, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, obviously. But now, as the commodity boom is drying up over the past several years, we have seen the prices for metals. In the past year, the price for oil has really plummeted. Governments are going to have to tighten their belts over the next few years, really, and cut public spending to some degree, and we are seeing more of a rightward shift because of the economic imbalances and really the pain on some of the populations that has been inflicted as a result of the distortions brought about by some of these policies, such as in Venezuela, in Argentina. And so there is definitely a slow shift, but you have to remember that it's not uniform. Just because Argentina and Venezuela have shifted does not mean that in places where presidents have been more successful in leveraging this kind of wealth, such as Bolivia and Ecuador, that the same kind of shift will occur.
Reggie, very briefly, as a final question, that relative success of those two governments, does it mean that there's still some semblance of hope for socialists?
Well, yes. In Ecuador and in Bolivia, the presidents have been much more successful, really, because they have avoided some of the pitfalls, such as in Argentina and in Venezuela, that really led to these kinds of economic distortions, such as high inflation and just general public deficits. But really, in Bolivia, Evo Morales is going to continue taking advantage of the fact that he has high natural gas revenues and two markets nearby that are really locked into Bolivian natural gas exports. So really, this is more of of a situational thing for Evo Morales and for Rafael Correa, who is barred from running in 2017 for president, but he will run in 2021. These places will likely continue experiencing some more success with their models, but ultimately they will feel the constraints of really the price declines in commodity prices.
Reggie Thompson and Gregory Wilpert, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, is Colombia on the verge of ending half a century of internal conflict? And in Picture This, why International Space Station astronauts won't be going hungry this Christmas. For 50 years, Colombia has been gripped by a civil war between the government and left-wing guerrilla fighters. Peace talks have been in the mix for 5 years, and both sides now say they are closer than ever to reaching a deal. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has vowed to reach an agreement with the biggest rebel group, FARC, by March next year. But there are many who are critical of concessions the government is planning to make and of the amnesty it will give to some of FARC's fighters. The Newsmaker's Yvette McCullough looks at the details of Colombia's peace deal.
After half a century of conflict, peace in Colombia could be closer than ever. More than 220,000 people have been killed in the civil conflict between the government and left-wing rebels belonging to FARC. Peace talks mediated by Cuba began in secret 5 years ago. Negotiators have set March as the deadline to come up with a final agreement. So far, they've agreed that the government will provide economic and social development to rural areas, as well as provide land to poor farmers. FARC rebels will be allowed to participate in politics. In exchange, FARC has agreed to stop the production of illicit drugs. And there will be an amnesty for its fighters, excluding those who have committed the most serious crimes. While many Colombians have welcomed the peace process, questions have also been raised about the integrity of FARC's intentions. The leftist Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, was founded in 1964. They took up arms, hoping to overthrow the government and replicate Cuba's communist revolution. FARC opposes US influence, privatisation of natural resources, and insist they represent the rural poor. Their methods include attacking infrastructure and kidnapping. They're also heavily involved in Colombia's cocaine trade. In 2001, FARC had an estimated 16,000 fighters. In 2013, it was down to 7,000. With its strength and influence diminishing, the group has been willing to negotiate.
Today, I want to announce that these exploratory meetings have culminated in the signing of a framework agreement between the national government and the FARC, establishing a procedure, a roadmap to reach a final agreement to end once and for all this violence between children of the same nation.
President Juan Manuel Santos has promised to end this conflict. His re-election last year has been taken as a mandate to continue peace talks. However, his critics are increasing. The most vocal, a former president, who says Santos is letting FARC get away with murder.
The government has accepted to apply the same justice mechanisms to terrorists and the armed forces who have been respectful of democracy.
But this peace deal won't go through unless Colombians want it. The final agreement will be put to them in a referendum. After living with this conflict for 50 years, the ability to end it for good will be in Colombian hands. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now for more on this is Peter Hakam, President Emeritus and Senior Fellow at the Washington-based think tank Inter-American Dialogue. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Hakam. Will there be a peace deal soon?
Sure. Well, I expect there will be. Progress has been made. It's been slower than lots of us had hoped, but it is proceeding down the agenda. And it looks like they're dealing now with the hardest prospects They've set a deadline next March, although the FARC itself suggests that that may have to be extended. But I think that both sides now seem to want an agreement. They seem to recognize that they would both benefit from that. And I think the Colombian people are ready for it.
220,000 people dead, millions displaced. This has been going on for half a century. From the FARC's perspective, have they lost?
I think, yes, they have really lost. There's no question that they clearly are still guerrillas 50 years later. They're still living in the jungle. They're still contending for power. They have not become rich, wealthy, or powerful throughout this. They've lost much of the support they once had. For example, among the left in Latin America, among progressive groups in Europe, within Colombia, they're detested.
As part of a peace deal, they want to evolve into a political movement. Do you foresee them becoming a political movement and Jeffersonian Democrats anytime soon?
Well, you know, it's hard. I suspect they're going to have to fold themselves in to the left, the current center left, if they want to have any real political success. The fact is that many on the left in many other countries in Latin America see a peace treaty as actually strengthening the current democratic left, if you like, in Colombia and giving them far more of a chance to achieve greater political power and influence. So the signing of the peace treaty may benefit not only the country as a whole, but specifically groups on the left that have had to deal with the handicap or burden that any notion of any association or commonality with the FARC really weighted them down.
I wonder, what about some of those right-wing paramilitary groups, particularly the most brutal ones? Are they just going to roll over and die and disband the moment there's a peace deal between the government and the FARC? Does the government have a plan to disband them as well?
Well, they in fact have been formally disbanded. Many of them have regrouped into essentially criminal enterprises now. There will be problems. The fighting won't end from one day to the next. But I think we'll see a retreat, that there is no political future in paramilitarism or in left-wing guerrilla activity. So my sense is that you will begin to see the results if a peace treaty is reached, if the questions of transitional justice, which were raised in the broadcast, are resolved. I think the serious problems of paramilitarism will begin to decline, and you know, Colombia, there's no reason why it shouldn't become essentially a normal country again.
Peter Hakem, thank you very much for your thoughts. Pleasure talking to you. In today's Picture This, a resupply mission to the International Space Station has been successfully launched and is expected to arrive with the space-dwelling astronauts on Wednesday. The capsule will deliver over 3 tons worth of food, clothing and spacewalk equipment to the manned space mission. Take a look. Today's Newsmaker has been Venezuela's Chavismo, the political and economic vision of Hugo Chavez that was continued by President Nicolas Maduro, a vision that has dominated Venezuelan politics for nearly 17 years, that now could be losing its way. On Sunday night, Venezuelans voted overwhelmingly in favor of the center-right opposition. After years of economic woe, triple-digit inflation and plummeting oil prices, Venezuela appears to have lost faith in President Nicolas Maduro. He's still president, but he now rules with a National Assembly filled with legislators firmly against his ideals. The landslide result comes just 2 weeks after Argentina voted in a center-right president, Mauricio Macri, who promised to turn around the country's economic outlook. As Latin America's economic slowdown continues, is Venezuela's election result the beginning of a continent taking a right turn? You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.